I never thought a simple email would shatter my world. It was supposed to be a regular workday, with my only worry being whether I could finish my project on time. But when I opened that message, everything changed. My wife, Melissa, had left her laptop at home, and I'd logged in to send myself some photos from a recent vacation. That's when I saw it, a thread titled, "This Weekend's Plan, Redheart." It felt like a punch to the gut. My hands trembled as I clicked. There, laid bare in cheerful messages, was a string of secret plans between Melissa and some guy named Derek. Romantic dinners, hidden rendezvous, and the most painful words, "Can't wait to see you." My heartbeat roared in my ears. The coffee I'd just drunk churned in my stomach. I dropped into the nearest chair, stunned. Melissa, the woman I'd married 5 years ago, the mother of our 2 kids, had been sneaking around behind my back, and she was excited about it. Before I could even process the betrayal, a mix of rage and disbelief coursed through me. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers, but I knew better. Acting on pure emotion would only make things worse. No, I needed to be smart, calculated, for my kids, for my sanity, and for whatever slim chance I had left to salvage my dignity. I closed the laptop and tried to gather myself, but my mind was already racing through scenarios, each one worse than the last. Was this a one-time fling, or something more serious? How long had this been going on? And why Derek, of all people? I didn't even know the man. Gripping the counter, I took a shaky breath. I had to learn the full extent of her betrayal before making any moves. If I was going to expose her, I needed irrefutable proof. I forced myself to function through the day, pretending everything was fine. But inside, a storm was brewing, and I was already forming a plan. One way or another, I would get to the bottom of this. And when I did, Melissa and Derek would have no idea what hit them. That night, I couldn't help but notice every detail about Melissa. How she acted with the kids, the way she moved around the house, even the smile she gave me when she asked how my day was. Was any of it genuine, or had she become a master of deception? I struggled to keep my expression neutral, not wanting to give away that I knew anything. As we sat down for dinner, I caught her glancing at her phone. Just a quick peek, but it was enough to make my blood boil. Was she messaging him right now? I forced myself to focus on the kids, who were telling me about their day at school, their laughter and innocence a reminder of what I needed to protect. After we put the kids to bed, I watched as Melissa retreated to the bedroom, her phone still clutched in her hand. I waited for a few minutes, then quietly made my way to the hallway, positioning myself just outside the door. The unmistakable sound of her laughter seeped through the cracks, soft and sweet, as she whispered something I couldn't quite catch. My fists clenched, the wood of the doorframe pressing into my skin. I had to step back before the anger took control. I needed proof, not an emotional outburst. With a deep breath, I returned to the living room and pulled out my laptop. If she thought she could fool me, she was in for a surprise. My first step was installing software on her phone that would allow me to track her messages and location. A small, almost guilty pang hit me as I worked, but I brushed it off. She was the one who had broken our trust. I was only trying to find the truth. Once the software was ready, I waited for the opportunity to sneak into the bedroom. The chance came soon enough. Melissa had gone to the bathroom, leaving her phone charging on the nightstand. I slipped in, installed the app in under 2 minutes, and quietly slipped back out before she returned. My heart pounded, but I felt a grim satisfaction. Now, the real investigation could begin. The rest of the evening dragged by in tense silence. Melissa didn't seem to notice anything different about me. If anything, she appeared more relaxed, almost glowing. It was disgusting, but I played along, exchanging small talk until we both drifted to bed. As I lay there in the dark, the glow of her screen occasionally lighting up the room, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was about taking back control. I would expose every lie, every hidden message, and every deceitful smile. And when the time came, Melissa and Derek would regret the day they underestimated me. The next morning came too quickly. I woke up exhausted, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Melissa was already up, moving through the kitchen with a kind of effortless grace that made my anger flare even more. I couldn't stand the thought of her pretending to be the perfect wife and mother when I knew the truth. But I forced myself to act normal, to keep the plan in motion. I kissed the kids goodbye and left the house, pretending I had a full day of meetings ahead. In reality, I parked around the corner and waited, my hands drumming nervously on the steering wheel. I had set up a GPS tracker on her phone, so when she left the house, I could follow her. It didn't take long. By 9:30, she was out the door, dressed in a professional outfit that somehow felt too polished, too deliberate. I watched the tracker on my phone as she drove across town. Her destination wasn't her office. No, she was headed straight for a cafe in the trendy part of the city. Suspicion confirmed. I started my car and followed, my heart pounding harder with every turn. As I parked a block away, I could see her through the cafe window. She was sitting in a corner booth, and across from her sat a man I recognized immediately, Derek. He looked the part of a suave corporate type, with a confident grin and an expensive-looking watch. They were laughing, leaning in close. The way she gazed at him made me feel physically ill. I knew that look. It was the same way she used to look at me when we first fell in love. I fought the urge to storm in and confront them right there. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped several photos from a safe distance. Evidence. Cold, hard proof that would back up my claims. As I watched them from my hiding spot, my mind raced. How long had she been seeing him like this? How many lies had she told me to be here? The thought of them being so open about their affair, sitting in a public place like they had nothing to hide, made my rage bubble to the surface. I had to take a few deep breaths, reminding myself that I was here to gather information, not make a scene. I couldn't afford to lose control. After what felt like an eternity, they got up to leave. Melissa touched his arm, and he responded by giving her a knowing smile. It was intimate, familiar. I gritted my teeth and waited for them to leave before tailing Derek to his car. He got into a sleek BMW and drove off, leaving me behind with more questions than answers. I needed to know more about this man, about his life, and what made him so damn irresistible to my wife. But first, I had to be careful. Melissa couldn't suspect that I was onto her, or my entire plan would unravel. Driving back home, I knew the next steps would be critical. I had to dig deeper, to find out everything I could about Derek. Because this wasn't just about catching them in the act anymore. This was about dismantling the entire web of lies they'd woven around me. And if they thought they could outsmart me, they were sorely mistaken. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my head was buzzing with a mix of anger and determination. The photos on my phone were just the beginning. If I wanted to take control of this situation, I needed more leverage, something undeniable. Something that could tilt the odds in my favor when the inevitable confrontation came. Melissa was back home, playing her part as if nothing had happened. She was in the living room with our youngest, helping him color in a picture of dinosaurs. The sight was almost too much to bear. How could she be so normal, so motherly and sweet, when just an hour ago she had been all smiles for another man? I managed to give her a tight smile and retreated upstairs, claiming I had work to catch up on. Locking the door to my office, I sat down and pulled up everything I could find about Derek. Social media, business profiles, anything that might give me a clearer picture of who he was. It didn't take long to piece together his life. A regional manager at some corporate firm, recently divorced, and living in a high-end condo downtown. His Instagram was public, filled with photos of expensive dinners and gym selfies. He was one of those guys who knew he looked good and liked to show off. I leaned back in my chair, seething. It all fit perfectly. Melissa probably fell for his flashy confidence and the allure of something new and exciting. Meanwhile, I had been at home, working late nights, fixing things around the house, and taking care of our kids. How long had she been trading our life for this fantasy? My phone buzzed, breaking my train of thought. It was a text from Melissa. "Hey, love. Thinking about making your favorite for dinner tonight. Sound good?" I nearly laughed out loud. The nerve of her, pretending like everything was fine. I typed back a quick, "Sure," and tossed my phone aside. She was trying to act like the perfect wife, probably to keep me from suspecting anything. But I saw through it now. Every gesture, every touch, every smile. It was all a performance. Later that evening, we sat down to dinner as a family. Melissa had gone all out. Steak, mashed potatoes, the works. The kids were delighted, talking excitedly about their day while Melissa and I exchanged pleasant but empty words. She kept looking at me, her eyes searching for something. Did she sense that I knew? Did she feel guilty? Or was it all part of her act? I excused myself early, saying I had a headache, and went upstairs. Locking the bedroom door behind me, I sank onto the bed, feeling the weight of everything pressing down. I needed to move fast, to gather every piece of evidence before she could hide or twist the truth. This wasn't just about my pride anymore. It was about protecting my kids and our future. Pulling out my phone, I decided it was time to get in touch with a friend who could help. Dan, an old buddy of mine, worked as a private investigator. We hadn't spoken in years, but he'd always said to call him if I ever needed a favor. And right now, I needed more eyes on Melissa and her lover. I dialed his number, my heart pounding with anticipation. Dan? It's James, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need your help. It's about Melissa. She's having an affair, and I need proof. Real proof. Dan listened, his tone serious as he agreed to meet the next day. He'd bring the tools of his trade. Surveillance, tracking, the works. As I hung up, I felt a small surge of relief. I wasn't in this alone anymore. I was ready to expose every lie, every betrayal, and make damn sure they paid for what they'd done to our family. The next day, I woke with a new sense of purpose. The bitterness and pain were still there, but now they were fueled by a resolve to take action. My plan with Dan was already in motion, and for the first time in days, I felt like I had some control over the chaos that had invaded my life. Melissa had already left for work by the time I came downstairs, leaving behind the scent of her perfume. It used to be a smell that comforted me, but now it only felt like a cruel reminder of her double life. I brushed off the thought and focused on the day ahead. By noon, I met Dan at a small cafe downtown. He hadn't changed much since college. Tall, rugged, with that intense look he always had when he was working a case. We exchanged a few pleasantries, but he quickly got down to business. "So, how bad is it?" he asked, leaning forward, his coffee untouched. I handed him my phone, showing the photos I'd taken of Melissa and Derek at the cafe. "That's the guy," I said, my voice tight. "Name's Derek. Works in corporate. They've been meeting up like this behind my back, and I need everything you can find on them." Dan studied the photos, his expression hardening. "You got a plan for this?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm not looking for a confrontation. Not yet. I just need proof, and I need to know the full extent of what she's been doing. I have to protect my kids, make sure they're not dragged through the mud if things go south." Dan listened quietly, then laid out his strategy. He'd place a small GPS tracker on Melissa's car, follow her movements, and get more substantial evidence. He'd also check out Derek, see if there were any skeletons in his closet that could work to my advantage. It was a simple plan, but effective. "Give me a week," Dan said, tucking the photos into his jacket. "I'll have something concrete for you." I thanked him and left, feeling a sliver of hope. It was strange to be plotting against my own wife, but the betrayal had left me no choice. As I drove back home, I wondered how I'd gotten to this point. How had our love story turned into a twisted game of deception and revenge? The rest of the week passed in a blur. I played the part of the clueless husband, going through the motions, keeping up appearances. But inside, I was waiting for Dan's updates, for any new evidence that would bring me closer to the truth. On Friday evening, Dan called. "James," he said, his voice tense, "I've got something." My heart raced. "What is it?" "She's not just meeting him for dinner dates," he said. "There's a hotel. They've been using it regularly, and I have photos and video surveillance to back it up. Also, your friend Derek? He's been in some trouble before. Workplace harassment, though the charges were dropped. Might be useful." I clenched the phone, a mix of rage and disgust boiling inside me. The hotel made it real. There was no longer any doubt or hope for misunderstanding. Melissa had crossed every line, and now I had the proof to confront her. "Send me everything," I managed to say. "I'll handle it from here." Dan agreed, and we ended the call. I sat there in the dark, my mind racing. The images he'd captured would break me if I let them, but I couldn't afford to be weak. This wasn't just about me. It was about protecting my children, ensuring they grew up in a world where their father stood strong when everything fell apart. The moment of reckoning was close, and when it came, I would be ready to look Melissa in the eye and make her face the consequences of everything she had done. I spent that night pacing the length of my home office. The surveillance files Den had sent me burning a hole in my inbox. I couldn't bring myself to open them, not yet. Just knowing that they were there was enough to keep my anger simmering. Instead, I tried to think about the next steps. I had to confront Melissa, but it had to be on my terms, and it had to be decisive. No emotional outbursts, no opportunities for her to manipulate the situation. I needed to be calm, calculated, and unshakable. The image of my kids, their bright smiles and innocent eyes, kept flashing through my mind. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about ensuring they didn't suffer because of our crumbling marriage. On Saturday morning, Melissa was bustling around the house, acting like the perfect wife and mother. She had made breakfast, laughing with the kids and talking about weekend plans. It made me sick to watch, but I put on a mask of normalcy and played along. After all, I had my own plan for how this day would end. I was thinking of taking the kids to the park this afternoon, she said, looking at me with a smile that felt like a slap. You know, give you some time to catch up on work or whatever. I swallowed down the bitterness that rose in my throat. Sounds great, I replied. They'd love that. She beamed, her eyes crinkling in that way that used to make my heart swell. But now, it only reminded me of the lies, the secrets, the betrayal. As she packed a picnic basket and loaded the kids into the car, I watched from the window, clenching my fists so hard my knuckles turned white. When they drove off, I finally let myself breathe. The house was silent now, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a battlefield, one where I was about to launch a strike that would change everything. I grabbed my phone and pulled up Dan's files, each photo and video a weapon in my arsenal. Finally, I let myself see what he had found. Melissa and Derek, in a hotel lobby, their bodies close and their faces flushed with excitement. Melissa, entering the hotel room, her laughter echoing in the hallway. Derek, wrapping his arms around her as the door closed. Every image was a knife to the heart, but I didn't flinch. I had to stay strong. Then came the video. I watched in silence as Melissa kissed him, her hands tangled in his hair, her eyes filled with a passion that she hadn't shown me in years. It was surreal, like watching a nightmare come to life. But instead of letting the hurt consume me, I channeled it into determination. I saved the files to a secure drive and sent a backup to a hidden folder on my computer. There would be no room for doubt or denial when I confronted her. I wanted to be prepared for any story she tried to spin, any attempt she might make to gaslight me into questioning what I knew to be true. An hour later, she came home with the kids, their laughter ringing through the house. I put on a smile, helped unpack the picnic basket, and listened to their stories about the park. Melissa was radiant, but I noticed the way she avoided meeting my eyes for too long, the way her smile faltered when our gazes met. Was it guilt? Or was she just tired of pretending? When the kids ran off to play, I took a deep breath and stepped into the kitchen where Melissa was unpacking. It was time. Hey, I said, my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. We need to talk. She turned, surprised. About what? I locked eyes with her, feeling the weight of every word that was about to come. About us. About the lies, the hotel, and everything you thought you were hiding from me. Her face went pale, and for a moment, everything froze. The truth hung between us, ready to explode. Melissa's face went from pale to ashen, her eyes widening in shock. She dropped the Tupperware she'd been holding, and it clattered loudly into the sink. The kids' laughter echoed from the living room, a painful contrast to the heavy silence now hanging in the air between us. What are you talking about? She stammered, trying to regain her composure. But I saw the panic flash across her face, the subtle clenching of her jaw, the way her hands trembled as she wiped them on a dish rag. It was a look I knew well. Melissa was cornered. I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter to keep my rage in check. Don't play dumb, Melissa. I know about Derek. I know about the hotel. I know everything. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air, her mind scrambling for an explanation that would make this all go away. But I wasn't giving her any time to think. "You've been lying to me for months, haven't you?" I continued, my voice low and controlled. "Sneaking around, pretending to be this loving wife and mother while you're out there with him." I spat out the last two words, feeling the bile rise in my throat. Melissa took a shaky step back, her eyes filling with tears. "James, please," she whispered. "Let's not do this in front of the kids." Her attempt to control the situation only infuriated me more. "Oh, now you're worried about the kids?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Were you thinking about them when you decided to destroy our family for some cheap thrill?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not this time. She reached out, but I pulled away, and the hurt in her eyes twisted something inside me. Anger, disgust, maybe even a sliver of sadness. But I refused to let it break my resolve. "Please, let's talk about this," she begged, her voice cracking. "It's not what you think." I held up a hand, cutting her off. Don't insult me by pretending this is something it's not. I've got photos, videos, everything I need to show just how real this is. You don't get to twist the truth or gaslight me into thinking I'm crazy." Melissa's tears turned into full-blown sobs, her shoulders shaking as she broke down. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the video, the way she looked at Derek, and my sympathy evaporated. "Why?" I demanded, my voice cracking for the first time. "Why him? Why do this to us, to the kids? Was I really that horrible a husband?" Her hands flew to her face, and she sank to the floor, crying into her palms. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she choked out. "It started as just a friendship, and then things got out of control. I was lost, James. I felt so disconnected. So disconnected?" I barked, my anger flaring again. "You felt disconnected, so you decided to burn everything down instead of talking to me? We have 2 kids, a life, and you threw it away because you felt lost?" Her sobs grew louder, and I could hear the kids growing quiet in the other room, sensing the tension. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to calm down, to keep from dragging them into this mess any more than necessary. "We're done, Melissa," I said finally, my voice cold and hard. "You need to pack a bag and go. I'm not going to play house with you anymore, not after everything you've done." Melissa looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, her mouth trembling. "Please," she begged, "don't do this. Let's try to work through this. For the kids. We can go to counseling, fix what's broken." I shook my head, resolute. "You broke us, Melissa, and I don't think I can ever forgive you for it." The weight of my words seemed to crush her, and she fell silent, her sobs turning into soft, broken gasps. I turned away, my hands shaking, and walked to the living room where the kids were waiting. They looked up at me with wide eyes, sensing that something terrible had happened. I forced a smile, my heart shattering at the thought of how their world was about to change. "Hey," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Who wants to go get some ice cream?" The kids' eyes lit up at the mention of ice cream, their innocent joy cutting through the heavy atmosphere hanging over the house. My smile faltered for a moment, but I quickly pulled it back together, determined to shield them from the chaos that was about to unfold between me and Melissa. I couldn't let them see the cracks forming in our once happy family. Not yet. "Yeah," they shouted, running to grab their shoes. As they hurried to get ready, I glanced back at the kitchen. Melissa hadn't moved from where she'd collapsed onto the floor. She sat there, a broken shell of the woman I once loved, her hands still covering her face. I felt a pang of something, not sympathy, but a deep, aching sorrow for everything we were losing, for the years we'd built together, for the love we once had that was now twisted and mangled beyond recognition. But I pushed it down. This wasn't the time for second thoughts or hesitation. She had made her choices, and now we all had to live with the consequences. I guided the kids to the car, helping them climb into their seats and buckling them in. They chattered excitedly, blissfully unaware of the turmoil boiling beneath the surface. As I got into the driver's seat, I took a moment to compose myself. My hands were trembling, and my jaw ached from clenching my teeth so hard. The drive to the ice cream parlor was filled with the kids' laughter and silly songs, and I did my best to join in, to be present for them. It felt surreal, like I was playing a part in a drama that wasn't really my life. How could things feel so normal when everything had just come crashing down around me? We pulled into the parking lot, and the kids raced to the door, giggling and jostling each other. I followed them inside, grateful for the distraction. We ordered, and as they dug into their sundaes, I found myself lost in thought, staring at my melting scoop of vanilla. The reality of what lay ahead hit me like a freight train. A custody battle, a broken home, the cold, bitter truth that I would have to explain to my children why their mother wouldn't be tucking them in every night anymore. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to keep breathing. "Daddy?" My daughter's voice pulled me from the dark spiral. She looked at me with wide, worried eyes. "Are you okay?" I blinked, plastering on another smile. "Yeah, sweetheart. Daddy's just thinking. How's your ice cream?" She grinned, showing off a chocolate-smeared face. "It's so good." I chuckled, ruffling her hair. But the moment of levity was short-lived. My phone buzzed, and I instinctively checked the message. It was from Melissa. "We need to talk. Please, just come home and let's talk this through. I'm begging you." I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. Part of me wanted to confront her, to get everything out in the open and see if there was any chance of salvaging something, even if it was just for the sake of the kids. But the other part, the one that had been betrayed and humiliated, wanted to walk away, to leave her to stew in her own mess. The kids finished their ice cream, and we piled back into the car. The drive home felt heavier, the illusion of normalcy slipping away with every mile. When we pulled into the driveway, Melissa was standing on the porch, her face pale and puffy from crying. She looked at me with a mixture of hope and desperation. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever came next. "Go on inside," I told the kids softly. "Mom and I need to talk." They hesitated, sensing the tension, but they obeyed, glancing back nervously as they went inside. Melissa waited, her hands clasped tightly together, her body trembling. "James," she started, her voice breaking. "Please, we need to find a way to fix this." I met her gaze, my own eyes hard and unyielding. "We're beyond fixing, Melissa, but you have 5 minutes. Start talking." Melissa swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she wiped at the tears still streaming down her face. I could see her struggling to compose herself, to find the right words that might save her from the abyss she had thrown us into. "James, I know I've hurt you," she began, her voice cracking. "I know I've done something unforgivable, but I'm begging you to listen. Please let me explain." I crossed my arms, leaning against the porch railing. "You have 5 minutes," I said coldly. "Make them count." She took a shaky breath, her shoulders heaving. "It wasn't supposed to happen. When I met Derek, it was harmless at first. Just someone to talk to when I felt disconnected from you. We had drifted apart, James. You were so busy with work, with the kids. I felt invisible." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay silent as she continued. "I'm not saying that to excuse what I did," she rushed on, her voice thick with desperation. "But I need you to understand why it happened. I was lost, and he made me feel seen again. But I swear, it didn't mean I stopped loving you. I love you, James. I always have." I let out a bitter laugh. "You love me? Is that what you tell yourself when you're sneaking into hotel rooms with him? When you're lying to my face, telling me you're just working late?" She flinched, her tears flowing freely now. "It was a mistake, a terrible, awful mistake. I ended it weeks ago because I realized what I was risking. I knew I had to come back to you, to our family. I've been trying, haven't I? The dinners, the outings with the kids. I've been trying to make things right." "Trying to make things right?" I echoed, my voice rising with disbelief. "Melissa, you didn't try to come clean. You didn't try to fix anything until you got caught?" She fell silent, her eyes wide with guilt. "I was scared," she whispered, "terrified of losing everything, of losing you. I thought I could fix things without you knowing, that I could be better, be the wife and mother you deserve. I shook my head, feeling the exhaustion seep into my bones. You don't get it, do you? You broke something in me, something in this family, and it's not as simple as pretending it never happened. You shattered the trust one had in you. Her hands reached out, but I stepped back, and the hurt on her face cut deep. James, I'll do anything, she pleaded. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. We can find a way to heal, for the kids' sake. I stood there, my mind a whirlwind of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a sadness so profound it felt like it would crush me. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give in for the sake of our children and the life we'd built together. But the other part, the part that had seen those videos and felt the sting of her betrayal, knew it wasn't that simple. I don't know if that's possible, I said finally, my voice hoarse. You've destroyed too much for it to ever be the same. And I need time to think, to figure out what's best for the kids and for me. Melissa broke down, sinking to her knees on the porch. Please, she sobbed. Please don't give up on us. I looked down at her, the woman I'd loved and shared my life with, now a broken mess begging for forgiveness. It was a pathetic, heart-wrenching sight, but I refused to let it sway me. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. I turned and walked into the house, leaving her there on the porch. Inside, the kids were watching from the staircase, their faces etched with confusion and worry. I forced myself to smile, even as my heart shattered again at the sight of them. It's going to be okay, I lied, my voice steady for their sake. Go on, play your games. Daddy's here. And with that, I knew the hardest part was yet to come, deciding how to piece our lives back together, one broken shard at a time. That evening, the tension in the house was suffocating. Melissa had come back inside after composing herself, her eyes swollen and red from crying. She moved around the house like a ghost, avoiding my gaze and keeping her distance from the kids, as if she knew the facade she had kept up for so long was shattered. The kids sensed something was wrong, but they didn't understand the full extent of the disaster. How could they? After dinner, I put the kids to bed. I lingered in their room longer than usual, reading extra stories and making sure they drifted off with smiles on their faces. They deserved so much better than this mess. As I tucked them in, I promised myself that I would do whatever it took to keep their world as stable as possible, even if mine was in ruins. When I finally closed their door and stepped into the hallway, Melissa was waiting for me. Her eyes were puffy, and she looked small, vulnerable. She took a step forward, but I held up my hand, keeping the distance between us. James, please, she whispered. I can't stand the silence. I clenched my jaw, struggling to keep my emotions in check. What do you want me to say, Melissa? I asked, my voice strained. That I forgive you? That we can just move past this and pretend nothing happened? Her lip trembled. I know it's not that simple, but I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family. I felt a wave of bitterness wash over me. You should have thought about that before you tore it apart, I said, my voice low and cold. You don't get to act like the victim now. She flinched, and for a moment, we stood there, two broken people in a broken marriage, surrounded by the wreckage of what we used to have. Finally, she took a shaky breath and spoke again. Would you at least consider therapy? She asked, desperation evident in her voice. If not for us, then for the kids. We owe it to them to try. The mention of the kids made something inside me soften, just for a moment. They were innocent in all of this, and the thought of them growing up in a fractured home hurt more than anything else. But I couldn't make a decision based on guilt or nostalgia. I had to be rational, to think about what would truly be best for them, and for me. I'll think about it, I said finally, my voice devoid of emotion. But that's all I can promise right now. Melissa nodded, her shoulders sagging with the weight of her mistakes. She looked so defeated, so unlike the woman I had once adored, that I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the images of her with Derek, the way she had lied to my face day after day, and any sympathy I felt turned to ash. I brushed past her and went to the living room, sinking into the couch and staring at the blank TV screen. The silence in the house felt different now, heavier. It was no longer the comforting quiet of a home filled with love and warmth. It was the silence of things breaking apart, of wounds that wouldn't heal. As I sat there, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from Dan. Got more info on Derek. Call me when you're ready. A grim determination settled over me. If Melissa wanted to fight for our family, then I needed to be fully armed with the truth. Whatever skeletons Derek had, I would unearth them and make sure he paid for his part in this betrayal. And as for Melissa, only time would tell if I could ever see her as more than a stranger who had shattered my trust. I knew this battle was far from over, but one way or another, I was going to make sure the pieces of my life fell into place on my terms. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose mixed with dread. Melissa had slept in the guest room, and though the distance between us was only a few feet of hallway, it felt like a chasm that would never be bridged. I couldn't dwell on that, though. Not when there were more pressing matters to handle. After making sure the kids were occupied, I went out to the garage to call Dan. The line rang twice before he picked up, his voice calm and professional. "James," he said, "I've got some things you'll want to hear." I braced myself, leaning against the workbench. "Lay it on me." Dan didn't sugarcoat it. Derek's been in and out of trouble at his workplace. Sexual harassment complaints, though nothing ever stuck. Either the women withdrew their statements, or it got swept under the rug. But get this, his ex-wife left him for the same reason. He had a history of manipulating women, charming them into affairs, and then tossing them aside when things got complicated. She took him to court for emotional distress, but he somehow walked away clean. I gripped the phone tighter. So Derek wasn't just some guy Melissa had fallen for. He was a predator, someone who knew how to twist situations to his advantage. The idea that Melissa had gotten wrapped up in his web only made my anger burn hotter, but I tried to stay focused. "Is there anything I can use?" I asked. "Something that might, I don't know, hold him accountable?" Dan hesitated. "There's no smoking gun, but his reputation isn't as spotless as he likes to pretend. I did find out that he's still seeing other women. Even now, while he's been messing around with Melissa. He's got a pattern, James, and it could work in your favor if you play it right." My stomach twisted. Knowing that Melissa wasn't even the only woman he was stringing along made me feel sick. Had she known? Or had she been just another pawn in his game? "Thanks, Dan," I said, trying to process everything. "I'll figure out what to do next." I hung up, feeling both vindicated and crushed. Derek was a master manipulator, and Melissa had fallen for it. But that didn't absolve her of her choices. She'd still betrayed me, and that was something I couldn't overlook. Yet, knowing he'd used her, knowing she was one of many complicated things, I walked back into the house, the weight of this new information pressing down on me. Melissa was in the kitchen, staring into a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold. She looked up as I entered, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. She straightened, bracing herself for another round of accusations. "Okay." I took a deep breath, laying out what I'd learned. Derek isn't who you think he is. He's got a history of this, of seducing women, manipulating them, and moving on to the next. He's still seeing other women, even now. Her face went pale, and I watched as the realization dawned on her, horror twisting her features. "What?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "He told me. He said he was different." I didn't feel any satisfaction in her pain, only a bitter sense of defeat. "You're not the first, Melissa, and you probably won't be the last." She sank into a chair, her hands shaking. I was so stupid," she choked out. "I thought he cared about me. I thought," her voice faltered, and she buried her face in her hands. I wanted to feel anger, to lash out, but I was exhausted. "You let him tear our family apart," I said quietly. "And now you have to face what that means. For you, for me, and for the kids." Melissa looked up, her eyes full of regret and desperation. "I'll do anything to make this right," she whispered. "Please, James. I'll cut him out of my life. I'll go to therapy. Whatever you need." I studied her, searching for some sign of sincerity. She looked broken, but was it because she realized what she'd done to our family, or because she'd been used by a man she thought cared about her? It was hard to tell. "I'll think about it," I said again, the same words that had become my shield. "But don't expect this to be easy." She nodded, her shoulders slumping, and I left the kitchen before the emotions could overwhelm me. The battle was far from over, but at least now I had the upper hand. Whether it would be enough to salvage anything remained to be seen. The rest of the day crawled by in a haze. The house felt heavy with unspoken tension, the weight of everything hanging in the air. Melissa kept her distance, hovering around the edges of the rooms, as if she were afraid that stepping too close would shatter whatever fragile truce we had left. The kids, blissfully unaware of the storm raging between their parents, played in the backyard, their laughter piercing through the otherwise grim atmosphere. I couldn't sit still. My mind kept replaying Dan's words. Derek was a manipulative predator, and Melissa had been one of his many victims. But she was also a willing participant. That's what I struggled with the most. How much of this was her fault, and how much was the result of her being deceived by someone who knew exactly how to prey on vulnerabilities? Around mid-afternoon, I decided I needed air, or I was going to lose my mind. I stepped out onto the porch, watching the kids chase each other across the lawn. Their innocence was a painful reminder of what was at stake, of what I was fighting to protect. As I leaned against the railing, the door behind me creaked open. Melissa stepped out, her face still drawn and pale. She looked at me hesitantly, her hands wringing together. "James," she said softly, "can we talk for a minute? Just really talk." I didn't turn to face her right away, keeping my eyes on our children. But after a few moments, I gave a curt nod and gestured for her to sit on the porch steps. She hesitated, then took a seat, the space between us feeling like a chasm. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she started, her voice quiet and filled with sorrow, "about everything I've done and how I let it get this far. I know there's nothing I can say that will erase the hurt I've caused you, or make up for the damage I've done to our family." I stayed silent, my jaw clenched. She took a shaky breath, pressing on. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, her voice cracking, "but I need you to understand that I never wanted to hurt you. I felt so lost, so disconnected from the life we built. It's not an excuse, and I know that. But Derek made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Wanted, seen. I know now that it was all a lie, that he was using me, but I can't undo what I did." Finally, I turned to look at her. "And what now?" I asked, my voice devoid of any warmth. "What do you expect to happen next, Melissa?" She wiped at her eyes, her shoulders sagging. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. Counseling, separation, whatever you need. I can't lose you and the kids. Not like this." I studied her for a long time, searching for any sign that she truly understood the gravity of what she'd done. Her pain looked real, but I couldn't forget how real her betrayal had felt, too. The hurt she caused was still fresh, still raw, and it wouldn't heal easily, if it ever did. "I need time," I said, my voice heavy. "I need space to think about what's best for me and the kids. You say you're willing to do anything, but I need to see that. Not just words, but actions." She nodded slowly, her eyes brimming with tears. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll give you time, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove that I'm committed to making things right." We sat there in silence, the only sound the laughter of our children playing in the yard. It felt like a cruel twist of fate that something so beautiful and innocent could exist alongside the ugliness of what had happened. But that was the reality we were left with, a fractured family trying to find a way forward, even if the path was uncertain. I didn't know what the future held, or if I could ever forgive Melissa for what she had done. But as I watched the kids chase each other under the fading sunlight, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever decision I made, it would be for them. The days that followed were a blur of forced normalcy and simmering tension. Melissa kept her distance, respecting my request for space. She took over more responsibilities with the kids, cooking their meals, helping with homework, and playing with them in the afternoons. It felt like she was trying to compensate for the damage she had done. And while I appreciated her effort for the sake of the children, it didn't make the hurt go away. I kept my focus on the kids, making sure their routines stayed as consistent as possible. But at night, when the house was quiet, the weight of everything would come crashing down on me. Sleep became an elusive luxury. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every moment that had brought us to this point. The memories of us as a happy family felt like cruel reminders of how quickly everything had unraveled. One evening, as I was clearing the dinner table, my phone buzzed. It was Dan, and his message was simple. "We need to talk. Urgent." I stepped outside onto the back porch, the cool night air stinging my skin. "What's up?" I asked when I called him back. Dan's voice was serious. "James, I've been digging a bit deeper into Derek's background, and it's worse than I thought." I frowned, my pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" "Turns out he's involved in more than just affairs," Dan said. "There's a history of financial manipulation. He's left a trail of ruined lives, investments gone wrong, people left bankrupt, and there's a rumor circulating that he's using some of these affairs to access sensitive information. Maybe it's for personal gain, or maybe it's something else. Either way, he's dangerous." My hand tightened around the phone. "You're telling me Melissa could have been part of some scheme?" The idea that this wasn't just a personal betrayal but something with wider, more sinister implications made my stomach turn. "It's a possibility," Dan said grimly. "I'd be careful. If he's manipulating people for financial or personal gain, he might not take kindly to being exposed. You need to protect yourself and the kids." I closed my eyes, the reality sinking in like a lead weight. Derek wasn't just some fling, some meaningless mistake. He was a threat, someone who could still hurt my family if I wasn't careful. "Thanks for the heads up," I said. "I'll be on my guard." After I hung up, I stood there for a long moment, the chill in the air doing nothing to numb the anxiety coursing through me. This whole situation had become more complicated than I ever imagined. Melissa's affair had not only shattered our marriage, but had also tangled us in something far darker. I went back inside, the sound of the kids' laughter echoing from the living room. Melissa was sitting on the floor with them, building a tower of blocks, her smile strained but genuine. She caught my eye, and for a second, something unspoken passed between us, a fragile hope, a desperate plea for understanding. But I couldn't let my guard down. That night, after the kids were in bed, Melissa approached me in the kitchen. "You've been quiet," she said softly. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated, wondering how much I should share. "I talked to Dan today," I said finally. "He found out some things about Derek. Things that make me worry about the safety of our family." Her eyes widened, fear and guilt flashing across her face. "What do you mean? Is he dangerous?" I met her gaze, my expression hard. "He could be. And that's why I need to know if there's anything else you're hiding from me. Anything that could put the kids or me at risk." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head. "I swear, James, I had no idea. I didn't think it was anything more than," she trailed off, her voice breaking. "I didn't think he was dangerous." I searched her face for any hint of a lie, but all I saw was fear and regret. I wanted to believe her, but I'd learned the hard way that trust wasn't something I could give freely anymore. "I hope you're telling the truth," I said quietly, "because if you're not, it won't just be our marriage that's destroyed. It could be our entire family." She nodded, wiping at her tears. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, "for everything." I turned away, not ready to offer forgiveness or comfort. The threat of Derek was real, and until I knew we were safe, I couldn't afford to let my emotions cloud my judgment. The fight was far from over, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The days blurred into one another as the weight of Derek's potential threat loomed over everything. My mind was constantly racing, analyzing every move and every decision I needed to make to keep my family safe. I had already changed the locks, set up security cameras around the house, and started keeping a baseball bat by the front door, just in case. It felt surreal to be taking such measures, but I couldn't afford to take any chances. Melissa tried to be present, but it was clear she was unraveling. The guilt and fear had left her fragile, and she tiptoed around me and the kids, unsure of her place in the home she had once ruled with love and laughter. I wanted to hate her for putting us in this position, but watching her crumble like this made me feel hollow. One evening, as I was tucking the kids into bed, my daughter looked up at me with big, curious eyes. "Daddy," she said softly, "why is Mommy always sad now?" I froze, my heart twisting at the question. How could I explain something so complicated to someone so innocent? Mommy's going through a hard time, I said gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. But you don't need to worry. Daddy's here, and I'll always keep you safe. She nodded, accepting my answer with the trust only a child could have. But her question lingered in my mind long after she'd fallen asleep, a painful reminder of how much our family had changed. That night, I sat alone in the living room, nursing a glass of whiskey and staring at the security camera feed on my phone. The footage was empty, just the dark outline of our front yard and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Still, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that clung to me. Melissa entered the room quietly, hesitating at the edge of the shadows. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I sighed, setting down my glass. "What is it?" She stepped into the light, her eyes red and puffy. "I've been thinking about everything," she said, her voice trembling. "About how much I've hurt you and the kids, and how I let someone like Derek into our lives. I can't change what I've done, but I need you to know that I'm willing to fight for this family." I studied her, searching for any sign of the woman I used to know. Her sincerity was palpable, but sincerity alone wouldn't erase the damage. "What does that even mean?" I asked, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "It means I'm willing to do whatever it takes," she said, her voice cracking. "Therapy, moving away if it means Derek can't find us, even signing over custody if that's what you need to feel safe." She paused, her eyes brimming with tears. "I just want to protect the kids and give you some peace, even if it costs me everything." Her offer stunned me. For the first time, I saw just how deeply her guilt had cut her. She was willing to give up her own children if it meant keeping them safe from the consequences of her mistakes. It was a brutal, self-sacrificing offer that left me speechless. "I don't know what the future holds," I said finally, my voice softer than I intended. "But I'm not making any decisions right now. We'll take it one day at a time, and you need to show me that you're serious." "Words don't mean much anymore, Melissa." She nodded, the tears spilling over. "I understand," she whispered, "and I'll prove it, I swear." We sat there in silence, the unspoken words and shattered trust hanging between us. It was a fragile truce, but at least it was something. The following morning, the doorbell rang unexpectedly, and my heart leapt into my throat. I rushed to the door, baseball bat in hand, only to find a courier standing there, holding a small, unmarked package. I signed for it, my mind racing. As I closed the door and set the bat aside, Melissa appeared behind me, her face pale. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. I opened the package carefully, half expecting something dangerous. Instead, I found a single item, a USB drive, with a note attached that read, "Watch this. It's important." Melissa's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. "Derek," she whispered. I met her gaze, dread pooling in my stomach. Whatever was on that drive, I had a feeling it would change everything. I held the USB drive in my hand, its weight feeling far heavier than it should. The note taunted me, its vague warning gnawing at my nerves. Melissa stood behind me, her hands trembling, eyes wide with dread. The air between us felt electric, charged with the fear of the unknown. "Stay with the kids," I said, my voice flat but commanding. "I'll handle this." Melissa nodded, swallowing hard as she retreated to the living room, where the kids were playing blissfully unaware. My hands shook as I walked to the home office, every step echoing in the silence of the house. I knew that whatever was on this drive could be the final piece of the puzzle, or another blow to the fragile world I was barely holding together. I closed the office door behind me, slid the drive into my laptop, and held my breath as the video file loaded. The screen flickered, and the footage began to play. At first, it was grainy, a handheld camera filming from behind a partially open door. The scene was a hotel room, one I recognized from the photos Dan had given me. Melissa was there, sitting on the edge of the bed, her face etched with anxiety. And then Derek came into view, his charming grin in place, but his voice low and menacing. "You didn't think I'd just let you walk away, did you?" Derek's voice sent a chill down my spine. The camera zoomed in, capturing the tension between them. I told you. It's over, Melissa said, her voice shaking. I can't do this anymore. Derek laughed, but there was nothing humorous about it. You don't get to decide when it's over, he sneered. I've put too much into this little arrangement of ours. You think you can just cut ties and go back to playing house with your perfect husband? The footage continued, and my stomach twisted into knots. Derek was threatening her, using details about our family, our finances, and even our children as leverage. He leaned in close to Melissa, his voice dripping with malice. If you think you can walk away, I'll make sure your husband loses everything. I'll ruin you both, and your kids will pay the price. Melissa's face crumpled, and I could see the fear, the desperation, the regret. She tried to hold her ground, but Derek was relentless, using every tool of manipulation he had. The video ended abruptly, leaving me reeling. My hands were clammy, and my heart pounded in my chest. Derek wasn't just a manipulator. He was a predator, someone who had threatened not just Melissa but our entire family. She hadn't just been cheating. She'd been trapped, blackmailed, and made to feel powerless. I sank into my chair, trying to process everything. The betrayal still hurt, but now I understood the depths of the nightmare she had been living. Derek had her under his thumb, and by extension, he'd had power over me and our children. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was about survival. I heard a soft knock at the door, and Melissa stepped in, her face pale. "Did you watch it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I nodded, my emotions swirling in a confusing mess of anger, sorrow, and a twisted sense of relief. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Tears spilled down her face. "I was terrified," she whispered. "He made me believe that if I told anyone, he'd destroy us. I thought I was protecting you and the kids by staying silent. But I was wrong. So wrong." I looked at her, the woman I'd loved, the woman who had betrayed me and yet was now revealed to be a victim herself. It was too much to take in, too many layers of hurt and fear wrapped around a truth that was more horrifying than I could have imagined. "We have to take this to the police," I said, my voice steadying as the reality of what needed to be done sank in. "We can't let him keep threatening us." Melissa nodded, her eyes filled with a glimmer of hope. "I'll do whatever it takes," she whispered. "I just want to make it right." For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of unity. We were still broken, still shattered by betrayal, but now we had a common enemy. Derek had made a mistake by underestimating us, and if he thought he could tear our family apart without consequence, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The next day was a whirlwind of preparations and tense conversations. Melissa and I sat down to discuss how we would approach the police, laying everything out. The video evidence, the threats, the proof Dan had collected on Derek's past manipulations. It felt strange working together after so much betrayal and hurt, but now there was a shared determination between us, a desperate need to protect our family. We drove to the police station together, our hands both gripping the seats, tension thick in the car. Neither of us spoke, but the silence wasn't as hostile as it had been. It was more like the quiet before a storm, the kind where everyone braces for impact. When we arrived, the officer who took our statement listened intently, his expression growing more serious with every piece of evidence we presented. We handed over the USB drive, the photos, and Dan's research file. It was a surreal experience, reliving every dark moment as we recounted it to someone else, but we pushed through. "This is serious," the officer said, leaning back in his chair. "We'll need to launch a full investigation. In the meantime, we can provide protection and keep an eye on your home." I nodded, the weight of the situation settling onto my shoulders. "Just make sure he can't get to us," I said firmly. "I won't let him hurt my family." Melissa's hand hovered near mine, but she didn't reach out to touch me. The guilt and regret on her face were clear, but I couldn't think about that right now. Not when we were in survival mode. The officer assured us they would handle it, but I knew it would be a waiting game. And waiting for someone like Derek to make a move was a nightmare I wouldn't wish on anyone. We left the station feeling both relieved and anxious. The weight of the threat was still there, but at least we weren't facing it alone anymore. As we pulled into the driveway, Melissa let out a shuddering sigh. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing me, even a little." I clenched the steering wheel, the conflict raging inside me. "This isn't about forgiveness. Not yet," I said, my voice strained. "It's about keeping the kids safe. That's all that matters." She nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I understand." We stepped into the house, and the kids ran to greet us, their laughter a stark contrast to the darkness we'd been dealing with. I hugged them both tightly, feeling the weight of every decision pressing down on me. Melissa watched, her expression a mix of longing and pain, but she didn't try to force herself into the moment. She knew she'd lost that right. That evening, I called Dan again, updating him on what we had done. "You did the right thing," he assured me. "But be careful. People like Derek don't just roll over when they're cornered." "I know," I said, my voice hard, "and I'm ready for whatever comes next." But as night fell, my anxiety spiked. I checked the security cameras repeatedly, the baseball bat still within reach. Every noise made my heart race. Every shadow felt like a threat. Melissa didn't try to speak to me again, staying in the guest room, and I was grateful for the space. The betrayal still hurt, but for now, our focus had to be on survival. Around midnight, the house was quiet, but my mind was anything but. I sat in the living room, unable to sleep, when my phone buzzed. I picked it up, my heart pounding. It was an unknown number, and the message was simple. "You think you can take me down that easily? You have no idea who you're dealing with." I stared at the screen, rage and fear battling for dominance. Derek had just made his move, and now it was a matter of who would outmaneuver whom. He had made a mistake by threatening my family again, and I was ready to make him regret it. I set the phone down, my jaw clenched. This wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore. It was about ending this nightmare for good. I sat there, the glow of the phone illuminating Derek's ominous message, my mind spinning with the possibilities of what he might try next. The anger that had been simmering under my skin for weeks boiled over, but I forced myself to breathe, to think clearly. This had become a game of strategy, and I couldn't afford to lose control. My family's safety depended on it. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel safe. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside felt like a prelude to disaster. I grabbed the baseball bat, my grip tightening around the handle, and checked the locks again. The cameras showed nothing unusual, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was coming. I was still pacing the living room when Melissa emerged from the guest room, her face pale and drawn. She looked at me, taking in the tension radiating off of me, and her eyes flicked to the phone in my hand. "Did something happen?" she asked, her voice a strained whisper. I hesitated, then showed her the message. Her face went even paler, and she covered her mouth with her hand. "He's not going to stop, is he?" she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "No," I said flatly, "not until we stop him." She swallowed, her body trembling. "What do we do?" I was about to answer when the motion sensor on the security cameras beeped. My phone lit up with a notification. Movement detected in the front yard. My blood ran cold. I opened the camera feed, and there, in the shadows near the bushes, was a figure. Melissa saw the screen and clutched my arm, her fear palpable. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Is that?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I grabbed the baseball bat, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Stay here," I ordered, my voice firm. "Lock the door behind me. If anything happens, call the police." "James, please," she whispered, her grip tightening on my arm. "Don't go out there alone." I pulled away, meeting her terrified gaze. "I have to. I'm not letting him get anywhere near the kids." She hesitated, her eyes pleading, but I couldn't afford to waste any more time. I slipped out the back door, moving quietly around the side of the house. The bat felt solid in my hands, a small comfort as I crept toward the front yard, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure was still there, moving slowly, almost deliberately. I stepped out from the shadows, raising the bat. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the night. "Get the hell away from my house." The figure froze, and for a moment, I thought they might bolt. But then they turned, and a flashlight clicked on, illuminating a face I didn't recognize. It wasn't Derek, It was a man in a dark uniform, his hand hovering near his hip. "Whoa, whoa," he called out. "I'm with the police." I stopped short, lowering the bat but keeping my grip firm. "Police?" I echoed, my suspicion mounting. "What are you doing sneaking around my yard?" The officer stepped into the light, holding up a badge. "We're on patrol. Your case has been flagged for potential threats, and we're keeping an eye on the property." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The threat wasn't gone, only temporarily held at bay. I thanked the officer, and he nodded, giving me a reassuring smile. "We've got your back," he said, "but stay alert." I returned to the house, my legs feeling like jelly. Melissa was waiting in the hallway, her eyes wide with worry. "Was it him?" she asked, her voice cracking. I shook my head. "No, it was the police. They're watching the house." Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, covering her face with her hands. "How did it come to this?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "How did we let him do this to us?" I set the bat down and crouched beside her, my own exhaustion pressing down like a weight. "We didn't let him," I said quietly, "but we're not victims anymore. We're fighting back." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a fragile hope. For the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of strength return to her gaze, and I realized that no matter how broken we were, we still had a chance. But it wouldn't be easy, and the fight wasn't over yet. The night stretched on, each second heavy with anticipation. I knew Derek wouldn't give up, but neither would I. Whatever he had planned, I was ready to face it. For my kids, for the family I was determined to protect, and for the justice I owed to the man he had underestimated. The following days passed in a whirlwind of anxiety and preparation. Melissa and I kept a close eye on everything, making sure the kids were never out of our sight and staying vigilant for any sign of Derek. The police patrols around the house helped, but there was no denying the fear that lurked in every shadow. Despite the tension, there was a strange sense of unity forming between Melissa and me. It wasn't forgiveness, and it certainly wasn't reconciliation, but there was an understanding, a shared determination to shield our family from the storm that Derek had brought into our lives. We worked together out of necessity, driven by a mutual need to protect our children. One afternoon, I received a call from Dan. "James," he said, his voice urgent, "I've got something for you. It's about Derek." "What is it?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "I found a paper trail," he explained. "Bank accounts, shell companies, the whole 9 yards. He's been laundering money and using his position to hide some very illegal transactions. If we can get this to the right people, we might have enough to put him away for good." My heart raced. This was the break we needed, something that could take Derek down once and for all. "Send me everything," I said. "I'll make sure it gets to the right authorities." Melissa came into the room as I hung up, concern etched across her face. "What's going on?" she asked. I filled her in, watching as the news sank in. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked hopeful. "Do you think it'll be enough to stop him?" I nodded, a spark of determination flaring in my chest. "It has to be. We'll make sure he pays for everything he's done." We spent the evening going over Dan's findings, preparing the documents and evidence to present to the police. It felt like we were finally taking back some control, like we weren't just helpless victims waiting for the next blow. But we both knew it wouldn't be over until Derek was behind bars. That night, as I was locking up the house, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from an unknown number. My stomach twisted as I answered. "Hello?" A familiar, chilling voice came through the line. "James," Derek drawled, his tone casual, almost amused. "I hear you've been busy, digging around where you don't belong." My blood ran cold, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You don't scare me," I said, my voice steady. "You're done, Derek. We have everything we need to put you away." He chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think it's that simple?" He sneered. "I have connections, James. People who can make things very difficult for you and your little family." My hand clenched into a fist. "Leave my family out of this," I snapped. "You've already done enough damage." His voice turned dark. "You should have stayed out of it. Now, you'll have to deal with the consequences." The line went dead, and I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, anger and fear battling within me. Derek's threats weren't idle. He was a man who thrived on control and intimidation, but I refused to let him win. Not this time. I turned to find Melissa standing in the hallway, her face pale with worry. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice trembling. I hesitated, then took a deep breath. "He knows we're coming for him," I said, "but we're not backing down." She nodded, a flicker of fear in her eyes, but also something else, resolve. "We can't let him keep doing this," she whispered. "No matter what happens, we have to see this through." I put the phone down, feeling the weight of our decision settle over me. Derek was a formidable enemy, but we had something he didn't: the truth and a determination to protect our family at any cost. The final confrontation was coming, and we had to be ready. Together, we would face whatever Derek threw at us. And this time, we would make sure he paid for every threat, every manipulation, and every ounce of pain he had caused. The days leading up to the confrontation with Derek felt like a countdown to an inevitable explosion. Melissa and I barely slept, our nerves stretched to their breaking point. We had handed over all the evidence Dan had uncovered to the police, and they assured us that an arrest was in the works. But until that moment came, Derek was still out there, still a threat looming over us. One evening, as I sat in the living room, the anxiety gnawed at me like a relentless predator. The kids were upstairs, blissfully unaware, but I had stationed Melissa in the guest room with strict instructions to stay with them. The baseball bat was beside me, but I knew if Derek was coming, he wouldn't be playing games. The doorbell rang, shattering the quiet, and I jumped to my feet, heart pounding. I grabbed the bat, my hands slick with sweat, and approached the door cautiously. Peering through the peephole, I was met with a face I hoped never to see in person. Derek, grinning, his eyes glinting with malice. I opened the door just enough to face him, keeping the bat at my side. "You've got a lot of nerve showing up here," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. Derek's smile didn't waver. "Relax," he drawled, as if we were old friends. "I'm just here to talk. No need for violence." "You think this is a game?" I demanded, my grip tightening on the bat. "The police have everything they need to put you away. It's over." He chuckled, his nonchalance infuriating. James, you've always been so naive. Do you really think your little evidence dump is enough to take me down? I have people who owe me favors, strings I can pull to make this all go away." I stepped forward, blocking his view of the inside of the house. "Stay away from my family," I growled. "I don't care how many people you have in your pocket. You're not going to win this." Derek's smile faltered, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "You're a stubborn one," he said, his voice dropping. "But here's the thing, I don't lose. And if you push me, I'll make sure your wife and kids pay the price." That was it. The thin thread of control I had been holding onto snapped, and I raised the bat, ready to defend my family at any cost. But before I could swing, red and blue lights flooded the street. Derek's eyes widened, and he turned to see two police cruisers pulling up, officers pouring out with weapons drawn. "Hands up, Derek," one of the officers shouted. "You're under arrest." For a moment, Derek's mask of confidence crumbled, and he looked at me with pure, unfiltered rage. "This isn't over," he spat, but he had no choice but to comply, raising his hands as the officers closed in and cuffed him. I stepped back, the adrenaline leaving me shaky and weak. One of the officers approached me, his face stern but reassuring. "You did the right thing," he said. "We'll make sure he doesn't come near you again." I nodded, barely able to process what had just happened. Derek was finally being taken away, his threats echoing in my mind, but at least for now, he was no longer in immediate danger. Melissa appeared in the doorway, her face pale and tear-streaked. She'd heard everything, and the relief on her face was almost overwhelming. I walked over to her, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I let myself exhale. "It's over," I whispered, though the weight of everything still pressed down on me. "At least for now." Melissa reached for my hand, but I pulled back, the wall between us still there. She understood, her eyes filling with regret, but she didn't push. There was still a long way to go, a long road to healing, if that was even possible. We stood there in the doorway, watching as the police cars disappeared into the night, taking Derek and his threats with them. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The hours after Derek's arrest were a blur. The police assured us they had enough evidence to keep him detained, and that he would face charges for his financial crimes and the threats he'd made against us. The relief was palpable, but so was the exhaustion. Melissa and I stood in the living room, the house feeling almost foreign in the aftermath of everything that had happened. We had won a battle, but the war had left deep scars. The kids were still asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of the chaos that had just been averted at our front door. Melissa sat down on the couch, her shoulders slumped in a way that made her look years older. She was a shell of the woman I'd fallen in love with, but I could see the small spark of hope that had returned since Derek had been taken away. I stayed standing, my arms crossed, as I wrestled with the storm of emotions inside me. Part of me wanted to collapse beside her, to take comfort in the idea that we had survived. But another part of me, the part still raw and bleeding from her betrayal, kept me at a distance. Melissa looked up at me, her eyes wide with sorrow. "James," she began, her voice breaking, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I broke us, and I shattered your trust. But I need you to know that I'm committed to making things right, even if it takes the rest of my life." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the silence between us was deafening. I searched her face, looking for any hint of deception, but all I saw was genuine remorse. Still, it wasn't that simple. "I don't know if we can ever be what we were," I said, my voice rough with the weight of everything we'd been through. "You didn't just hurt me, Melissa. You put our family in danger, and I don't know if I can forgive that." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I understand," she whispered, "but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. Even if it's just for the kids, I want to try." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "We'll take it one step at a time," I said, my voice resigned. "We owe it to the kids to try and build something stable for them. But I'm not making any promises." It wasn't much, but it was a start. The anger and betrayal still burned, but there was also a small ember of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward. Whether that meant healing together or going our separate ways remained to be seen. Months later, the world had started to make sense again, in a different way. Derek had been formally charged, and the court proceedings revealed the extent of his crimes. He wasn't just a manipulator. He was a criminal who had left a trail of destruction in his wake. Knowing he was facing years behind bars gave me a sense of justice, but it didn't erase the damage he had caused. Melissa and I had started therapy, both individually and together. It wasn't a magical fix, and some days were harder than others. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, and there were still moments when the bitterness resurfaced. But we were trying, for ourselves and for the kids. The kids were the real reason I kept pushing forward. They needed stability, love, and parents who put their well-being first. And as I watched them laugh and play, the innocence in their smiles untouched by the chaos we had faced, I knew we were doing something right. One evening, I stood in the backyard, watching the sun set over the fence. Melissa came out to join me, standing at a respectful distance. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said, her voice soft. I nodded, my gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, it is." We stood there in silence, the space between us filled with a fragile peace. It wasn't perfect, and it might never be, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. Thank you for being a part of this journey. If you've ever faced betrayal or a challenge that shook your world, share your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that dive deep into the complexities of life, love, and the battles we fight for those we care about.